Alrighty, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. Today we got an interesting one. Today we're going to be looking at my top 5 favorite filmmakers. Now, this is a purely opinionated list. This list is purely what I find appealing, whether it be story-wise, visually, cinematically, etc., etc. This is a purely opinionated personal list. So, I'm just going to hop right into it. Now, the number 5 pick took me a while to come up with. So I had a solid top 4, but I really wanted to come up with that 5th one. I really needed somebody to fill in the top 5. And I thought about Spielberg and Scorsese, Kubrick, all of them. But there was one that I came to and that I just kept coming back to that I had to put in. So, at number 5 on my list, we have Tim Burton. Tim Burton, obviously, is a fairly beloved filmmaker. He is known for his very gothic style filmmaking, which is one of the reasons I love him. His movies just have watching his movies almost makes you feel like you're back in the Victorian era, because his films carry a very Victorian gothic vibe to them. That's why he's so beloved. I also respect him for his work with Johnny Depp, who I believe is the greatest actor to ever live. I'm a huge Johnny Depp fan. I think his range is incredible. There's no role that he can't play and that he can't perfect. He is the greatest actor ever. I also love his work with Helena Bonham Carter, who obviously is one of the greatest actresses to ever live. And again, her range is impeccable. As far as my favorite movie of Tim Burton's, it's a toss-up between two, and those two are Batman and Edward Scissorhands. I think Edward Scissorhands is his best movie in terms of his work, something that's not really based off of previous source material. I don't know if Edward Scissorhands was a book. I'm not sure if he wrote it or not, but Batman is obviously one of the most iconic characters in media. So his Batman movie had a lot riding on it in terms of source material and all. But I grew up watching that Batman movie. I was born in 2001, but I watched that Batman movie a lot in my younger years. So it kind of holds with me. So does my love for Michael Keaton. So if I had to pick a favorite movie of his, it would be between Batman and Edward Scissorhands. Moving on to number 4. The filmmaker in my number 4 spot is Neil Blomkamp. Now, if you don't know who Neil Blomkamp is, he hasn't made that many movies. He's made a lot of short films, but he's made maybe 5 or 6 films. He's known for doing District 9. He did Elysium, Chappie, and he has a Gran Turismo movie coming out this year or early next year. The reason I like Neil Blomkamp is because he does a lot of sci-fi, but it's not the generic sci-fi. It's not always the humans versus aliens type sci-fi. His movies really deal with social and political problems and issues, whether it be xenophobia or racism or stuff like that. And I feel like that's a very underlooked portion of science fiction. We don't a lot of times see if aliens were to integrate into our society, how would they be treated? How would the government handle them? So on and so forth. So I think that's a very unique thing that he has brought to filmmaking and the science fiction genre. I also love that he has worked with Sharlto Copley a lot, who is a great actor. Comes out of South Africa, and I think Neil Blomkamp is probably the best filmmaker to come out of South Africa. And my favorite movie of his is the first of his movies that I've ever seen, District 9. I think District 9 is a great movie, terrific film, great acting, great story. The twist at the end, that kind of cliffhanger was great. And he's making a District 10, which I'm pretty stoked about. Moving on to number 3 is a very, very popular, well-known filmmaker. Love him or hate him, I love him. It's Quentin Tarantino. Now, I do feel like his most recent movies, starting with Inglourious Basterds, with the exception of The Hateful Eight, I feel like a lot of his movies have kind of fallen into the same formula. The same, you have a bad guy and the good guys are against the obvious bad guys and they kill them in a grandiose way. whether it be Nazis, slavers, cultists, which is great messages, but I just feel like he's kind of rehashing the same basic plot point with different settings and different characters. However, his earlier work is where he shines. Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Kill Bill, marvelous movies. But the reason I like him so much is because a lot of his movies, especially those earlier ones, were almost like love letters to cinema of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, you have Kill Bill kind of working off of the 1970s Kung Fu Hong Kong movies. His most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, obviously the late 60s, the whole, that turn of the 60s to the 70s, that was a huge change in cinema during those times. So all of his movies are almost like representations of a previous era of filmmaking, which I think is great. Another thing I love about him is he's got a very unique sense of camera work. He has a lot of like unique pans or zoom ins that I really love. There's one specific scene in Django Unchained where the doctor and Django are riding their horses out of town, and it's the shot looking down the street of the town, and they're riding the horses towards them. But as they get close and they pass, the camera just pans up just a little bit. And that, along with Jim Croce's song "I Got a Name" playing, is a beautiful scene. And that pan is just something about it. Just that camera panning up really quick with the whoosh sound effect, and then it cuts to the mountain scene. It's great. That whole scene, I think, is one of Tarantino's bests. It's one of his bests. And the reason I say that is because Tarantino's known for his vulgarity, for his bloody action sequences, but that one scene, that kind of travel montage with "I Got a Name" playing, is very wholesome. It's not fast paced. It's slow. It's really laid back. I think it's just a nice calming point in that movie, because that movie's very vulgar, very bloody, very violence packed. So I think that scene is one of his best. But my favorite movie of his is obviously the cult classic Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is his masterpiece. Pulp Fiction is literally a Pulp Fiction magazine put into movie format, and it's great. Reservoir Dogs is a high number 2. But moving on to my second filmmaker. Now, I wasn't really sure where to put Tarantino in this filmmaker. They kind of battled for the second and third spot, but I decided to put this filmmaker at number 2 just because I enjoy his movies a little bit more than Tarantino's, and that is Kevin Smith, the Jay and Silent Bob guy. The reason I love Kevin Smith, first off, is his range. Now, for the longest time, I didn't watch any of his movies. I knew who Jay and Silent Bob were, and I always thought it was just, it's just generic early 2000s stoner comedies. Which, obviously, like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a stoner comedy. But when I watched it, it was funny. It didn't totally rely on certain, aspects that movies relied on in the 2000s. It was a situational comedy, but it had a lot in it. But the reason I love Kevin Smith is because he has range. He can make, take for instance his first 3 movies. You have Clerks, which is like a low-budget independent film that's almost like an art house film. It's very artsy, and you have the title cards before certain scenes, and them shooting in black and white for it being cheaper. It's very artsy. Then you have the very next year, or the year after, you have Mallrats, which is a very, dare I say, generic early 90s comedy, like teen flick. I do think he was kind of pressured into making a movie like that, but it works. And, it's a very run-of-the-mill, early 90s, or mid-90s, early 2000s, that era, comedy movie. And then, in 96, I want to say, 97, he released Chasing Amy, which is this deep-rooted, very realistic love story between a straight man and a lesbian woman. And I feel like platonic love isn't talked about a lot in movies much. So that was a great film. And it just shows his range, that he can make a stoner comedy and he can make a love story, a romance film with comedy in it, but he's very good at transitioning from comedy to seriousness, and it's great. I also love his use of a connected universe. Now, I'm a Star Wars fan. I like Marvel alright, but I'm not the biggest fan of every movie being connected and having all the lines connecting. I think it kind of ruptures filmmaking. But with Kevin Smith, all of his movies stand alone, but they're part of a greater universe. I also love how he'll take the same actors and have them play different characters in that same universe. It's very quirky almost. It's very funny, and it works. But my favorite movie of his, and this is a very unpopular opinion because as I stated previously, my favorite movie of his is Mallrats. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that I've read that he received a lot of flack for it being a very generic, a very studio-like movie, almost like not a blockbuster, but like he was pressured by the producers into making a certain type of trendy movie. But I love it. I mean, I just think it's very laid back. It takes place in a mall during the span of a day, and it's just very laid back, not super action packed, and it's just very, I don't know, very laid back, I guess is the word that I would use. But now, moving into the number one spot, my favorite filmmaker of all time. Again, I feel like this filmmaker is also a love him, hate him kind of ordeal, but my favorite filmmaker of all time is the legendary, great, the auteur, Wes Anderson. And I love Wes Anderson for every reason I possibly could. Everything in the book. To me, watching Wes Anderson's movies is like going to a museum and looking at priceless, beautiful artwork in movie format. His use of camera work, his use of symmetry, unique storytelling, it all just combines to make great, beautiful films. It doesn't even feel right calling his work movies. I feel like I have to call them films because they're so artsy, they're so unique, they're so vibrant. And as I said, he gets flack sometimes for the way he makes his movies, but I think they're super unique. There's nothing like them. An acquired taste for sure. Don't get me wrong. I understand the people who are put off by his movies. They are a very, very acquired taste. But I love them. As I said, they're super unique, and you know a Wes Anderson movie. You can see one shot from one of his movies and automatically know that it's his movie. My favorite movie of his is Rushmore. That was his second film, released in 98, I think. Rushmore I just love. I love Bill Murray, Jason Schwartzman, just a marvelous film. The first movie of his I ever saw was Fantastic Mr. Fox, which as well is a great movie. And he has a new movie coming out soon, Asteroid City, which I'm super, super psyched for. I was unable to find a cinema showing or a theater showing The French Dispatch, which I wanted to go see, which, was a letdown that I wasn't able to see it in theaters, but I'm hoping to see Asteroid City in theaters. I was going to do the honorable mentions before number one, but I kind of transitioned right into it. So I'll talk about some honorable mentions. Of course, you have the top shelf Spielberg, Nolan, Cameron. I'm not a big summer blockbuster fan. I do give those filmmakers credit. They're legendary for a reason. Spielberg has been making movies. I think the first movie he made was Duel, I believe, which came out 74, somewhere in the early mid 70s. So he's been in the filmmaking business for 50 years now, so he's a legend. Nolan and Cameron, obviously James Cameron did Titanic, which is one of the most influential movies ever made. I also feel like I should mention Martin Scorsese, Stanley Kubrick, gods amongst men, really. And then you have the older legends like John Ford, Sergio Leone, the Westerns, Francis Ford Coppola. And I feel like I feel like I cannot mention a list of filmmakers without mentioning Akira Kurosawa. His movies were great on their own, but he has inspired almost every filmmaker that has come after him. George Lucas for one, was completely inspired by Kurosawa almost when making Star Wars. John Ford was also a very inspirational filmmaker for many, many filmmakers that came after. So I just wanted to mention them and just give them their light. They didn't make my top 5 personal filmmakers list, but they would definitely make a top 50 if I were to make one. But yeah, that is my top 5 favorite filmmakers list. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any input, if you want to state your top 5, feel free to do so in the comments below, and just let me know how you feel about my opinions, my list, why I chose them. I want to hear your thoughts. But anyways, I'm going to end the video here. That's all I really had today, was just the top 5 filmmakers. If you have any suggestions or ideas for other videos, whether they be rankings like this, or if you want me to review a movie or a filmmaker's work or whatever, just pop it in the comments below and let me know. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day, a great year, and a great life. Take care. Thank you.